Now, over 400 miners who staged an underground sit-in at Gold One mine east of Johannesburg have returned to the surface yesterday. Now, this was a second sit-in following one in October. That incident had about 500 miners held underground due to a dispute over union representation between the Association of Mineworkers and the Construction Union and National Union of Mineworkers at that mine. Now, this latest protest was partly due to a demand for the reinstatement of dismissed employees. Benchmarks Foundation lead researcher David van Wyk joins us now virtually to discuss this matter further. David, thank you so much. Welcome to Morning Live once more.
Thank you very much for having us.
So we saw another sit-in last week, and this sit-in by miners was because they wanted to challenge the existing closed shop agreement between NUM and mine management in the first instance. And then last Thursday, another situation ensued. But just tell us a bit about the reasons that led to this crisis overall, the fact that we've seen two sit-ins in the space of a month, so to speak.
Well, I think it's actually three, because we had another sit-in at Bakubung mine in the Rustenburg area as well. But this particular one goes back to the issue of union recognition and closed shop agreements and so on. In February this year, AMCU went to court to force the mine to try and have a ballot to see which union is the dominant union at the mine. That's after the mine recognized NUM in terms of the closed shop agreement. Then in October, there was a salary negotiation in which the minimum wage at this mine was raised to 10,000 rands per month, and then with a 6.5% increase in basic salary over the next year to 11,500. Now, we remember that mine workers demanded 12,500 in 2012 already. And so the workers became very dissatisfied with this particular situation, and then they had the first sit-in over the issue of the unions, but also over the issue of wages. NUM then very responsibly ended the closed shop agreement in November, but the mine suspended the leaders of those workers who had the first sit-in, and this then led to the second sit-in strike that we had more recently. The reason why workers are having sit-ins these days is because the old hostel compound system have broken down, and workers are now living on a living out allowance outside of the mine. So it's very difficult for them to organize outside where they stay like they used to in the old hostels. Nowadays, they are individualized by them living apart from one another. So the only place where they actually do have space to organize is actually underground. And this is why we're increasingly seeing occupations and sit-ins in the workplace. It's a kind of unforeseen result of the living out allowance and the end of the old apartheid hostel system.
So, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, David, and also the background, just to give a little more context to the situation. But given that, the Gold One mine has been in the news recently, many people are asking about the ownership of this mine and its specific background.
Well, I think that there is a problem with ownership. The country is changing very dramatically. The old companies, the old monopolies that dominated the economy are leaving. Anglo Gold, Ashanti, and so on are leaving. New players are coming in, and the Chinese Development Bank specifically is involved in both the Bakubung Wesizwe operation as well as in the Gold One operation. And what we are seeing with the Chinese companies is that very often they appoint very conservative managers, often of an Afrikaans background, at these particular mines. And the attitude towards labor of these particular managers is problematic. The other thing which, of course, makes the things very difficult in the mines nowadays is labor broking and subcontracting, because many workers are actually not unionized when they come through subcontractors and so on, and they actually get less income than other workers do. As mining is declining from large-scale industrial mining to medium and smaller-scale mining, we are getting a situation where the big unions are also in trouble because they're losing membership. And so mines are also closing down and shutting down and being abandoned and so on. And this creates fewer and fewer a smaller and smaller base for unions to recruit from, and a more intense competition between them.
And then that is, of course, very interesting. But of course, as the situation developed at both the two mines that you mentioned, David, it seems as though these are issues that could have been avoided, one, and in the event that it wasn't, it could have been better resolved. Let's start with Gold One and how that matter unfolded. Then you, of course, had the subsequent dismissal of workers for that first sit-in, and now workers staging a second sit-in in protest and in solidarity with the employees who were dismissed. Let's talk about how that was handled and, of course, the processes, because are we going to have a sit-in every time people are disgruntled or are dismissed?
Well, I think closed shop agreements are very problematic because they deny people their freedom to choose the union that they want to belong to. And also the process by which a mining company decides which is the dominant union is also problematic. I think that the issue of ballots are important, but also what is important is that when workers sign a contract, they automatically indicate which union the wages should be deducted or the union dues should be deducted to. And the mine should therefore have an idea about which is the dominant union in that particular mine without having to go through too much trouble. The problem that I'm having is that within the South African context, we have basic laws with regards to the Labour Relations Act and so on. And when foreign investors like the Chinese Development Bank and so on come in, one would expect that they adhere to our laws and to our constitution and that they do not actually behave differently. If you look at the Bakubung case, for example, female workers were dismissed for being pregnant. And I think that really goes contrary to the country's gender orientation and so on. Foreign investors that come into the country should not expect to be treated differently from local companies when it comes to the law. With regard to the Gold One issue, it could have been resolved in February already if they had a ballot immediately after AMCU went to court, and they could have demonstrated which union was the dominant union at the time. But they didn't do so, and then they had the sit-in. And then after the sit-in, NUM renounced the closed shop that it had with the mine, which was a very responsible thing to do. But the mining company then went on to suspend the leaders of that particular sit-in, creating the second sit-in. And this then causes a lot of loss for the investor because the mining operation comes to a standstill every time.
And of course, yesterday, Gold One Mine indicating that they were losing between 10 and 12 million rand per day as a loss of production. But just going back to Bakubung for a moment and the reasons for that sit-in, as you pointed out there, a pay hike and, of course, the demand for maternity policy revision. And again, you look at this and it's easy to scapegoat the miners, to say that they are causing this problem. They are the ones who are losing money for investors and, the subsequent follow through that will happen as a result of that. But surely the employers also need to take some of the blame for what's going on.
Well, exactly. I think that at the moment the gold price is above $2,000 an ounce. That's almost 40,000 rands an ounce. And, for a mining company to still be paying below 10,000 rands per month, when workers were demanding 12,500 in 2012 already, this is almost 10, 12 years later that these workers are still being paid less. And then, of course, there's the issue of retrenchments, because with the Bakubung case, there was also an announcement of retrenchments, but at the same time, jobs were being advertised. And workers are now, they have access to cell phones, they have access to the internet and so on. They can see what is going on. You can't do things in secret anymore. Everything is public now. And because things are public, you have to be transparent in your operations as a manager, as a human resource manager at a particular operation. But often I feel also for the human resource managers, because the production managers get preference when it comes to decision makings and management meetings and so on, with environment and labor issues always being last on the agenda. And then this comes back to bite the mine, because they're driving for profit rather than driving for better working conditions and better environmental management.
Of course, we have to talk about the salary discrepancies. You've mentioned this twice already in this conversation about, what led to the ultimate tragedy there in Marikana. It was, a struggle for wage hikes, 12,500. And as you say, people today are still asking for wage hikes, still earning below that 12,500 in 2023. And you look at that against a backdrop of the executives, CEOs, who are taking away hundreds of millions of rands in a profit share, in salaries, in bonuses. Is that gap closing?
No, the gap is definitely not closing. We know of a CEO that a year and a half ago gave himself a 300 million rand bonus. And, and the other thing which is very interesting is that our CEOs get equivalent incomes to their Australian and Canadian counterparts, but workers don't get equivalent wages. An Australian worker earns 1.7 million rands per annum. A South African worker earns 120,000 rands per annum. I think that discrepancy is huge, and the Australian mines are not that different from South African mines. If you drive a Scania truck on an Australian mine, it's exactly the same skills that are required for driving a Scania truck on a South African mine, for example. And South African mines are far more dangerous and difficult to work in. South African workers should actually be getting more than Australian workers. And Australia actually started its mining revolution long before South Africa. The knock-on effect of better wages for mine workers in South Africa could have lifted this economy into a manufacturing economy a long time ago, because it would have affected demand. After the very long strike in 2014 in the Marikana area, when the mining company settled with the workers, it had an immediate impact on demand, and you could see the figures in the country rising as those workers got a better wage. You can't actually develop an economy on the basis of a low-wage structure, because low wages mean people can't consume manufactured goods, and therefore there's no incentive for anyone to invest in manufacturing in this country.
So the solutions, what role does government need to play if we look at those discrepancies where, as you so poignantly point out, David, the executives earn what their Australian counterparts earn, but the workers in the belly of this earth don't? So what's the solution?
Well, I think the solution lies within government beginning to do what government should do, that is to regulate and to legislate. But they are not doing that at the moment, because they are so invested in mining themselves. We note that the president and the minister of mining used to be trade union leaders. They should have some sympathy for mine workers at least. But at the moment, all that is happening is that the minister of mining is just talking about increasing mining investment on the basis of cheap labor, and that's the wrong way to go about it. You should actually increase mining investment on the basis of an industry that is safe, an industry that is healthy, and an industry that has workers that are satisfied with their working conditions. That will attract investment, not cheap labor and people living in squatter camps.
Well, David, we'll leave it there for this morning. Thanks so much for that engagement. And that close shop agreement with NUM at Gold One will end on Thursday. I think that's what they said, Thursday the 14th. So we'll keep an eye on these developments. Benchmarks Foundation lead researcher David van Wyk discussing the Gold One strike and what's happening at Bakubung with us. We saw hundreds of miners sitting in underground, holding those sit-ins. So interesting perspectives there from David.